Azza wa Jal to bless His noble Prophet Muhammad ibn Abdullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam, to bless his noble companions, his family, and the righteous everywhere. Ameen. In the English language, when we use the term prayer, oftentimes when we're having conversations, especially perhaps with our Jewish or Christian friends or neighbors or coworkers, and this word prayer comes up, the word prayer, certainly from a Christian context, means a very particular thing. And oftentimes when we use the term prayer, we mean ritual prayer, the salah. And for Christians, prayer simply means to be able to speak to God or to call on God, which is, in our understanding or in our context or in the context of our tradition, that is dua, that is supplication, making dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which is very different and separate, or it can be separate from the ritual prayer. And the reason why the ritual prayer, and I even use the expression ritual prayer to define salah, is because it has certain requirements, certain prerequisites, certain things that you have to do in order for that prayer to be accepted. There is fulfillments that one must, certain things that one must fulfill in order to be able to pray, in order to be, to enter into a state of prayer. That is different from dua, which is supplicating to Allah, which is calling on Allah or conversing with God, which is, again, as I said, oftentimes when Christians use the term prayer, that's what they are referring to. But in our tradition, it is both expansive and inclusive, in that it is expansive in the sense that it covers ritual prayer, but it also covers the sort of Christian understanding, if you will, of what prayer is. And so dua is an integral component of our tradition. It is an integral component, not perhaps as equal as salah, certainly not as equal, but certainly it is something that our tradition speaks volumes about. The concept of, the idea of dua, or supplicating to Allah, to asking Allah for something. And so what I want to speak of today in this khutbah is this idea or the concept of dua, again, being distinct from ritual prayer or salah. And it is interesting because the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he says, ad-du'a huwa al-ibadah. Or in another hadith, which has some defect or weakness in it, he says, ad-du'a mukh al-ibadah. That dua is worship in the first hadith, or in the other narration, that the dua is the core, the center, the marrow, what is most meaningful of ibadah. That it is the marrow of our ibadah, the very center of our ibadah is dua. But again, the hadith, ad-du'a huwa al-ibadah, that dua is worship. And dua is worship, it is ibadah, because it is an expression of our ubudiyah. It is an expression of our servitude, of our relationship with God as His servants and His slaves, in that we have submitted to God. And so dua, beseeching Allah, calling upon Allah, is an act or an expression of that ubudiyah, of that relationship that we have with the Lord and cherisher of the universe. So it is that relationship that conditions us, that should condition us to turn to Allah, to call upon Allah. And the beauty of it is that unlike other forms or expressions of ibadah, dua really doesn't have a form. It doesn't have requisites or prerequisites that one must fulfill in order to ask Allah for something. We can ask Allah for something no matter our state. We don't have to be in a state of wudu, although it is perhaps preferred. We don't have to fulfill any requirements. We can simply talk to Allah. We can simply commune with our Lord. And that is the opportunity that dua presents us, brothers and sisters. It presents us this opportunity to forge and to create this intimate relationship with Allah, that we turn to Allah at moments of need, that we turn to Allah when we desire something, when we want something, when we find something lacking or something that is of hardship in our lives, we can turn to Allah. And that is what dua is. Ad-du'a huwa al-ibadah. Dua is that expression of our devotion to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now in the Qur'an, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in a beautiful verse that I want to spend the next brief time that we have in this khutbah referring to and speaking about. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in Surah Al-Baqarah, وَإِذَا سَأَلَكَ عِبَادِي عَنِّي فَإِنِّي قَرِيبٌ أُجِيبُ دَعْوَةَ دَاعِي إِذَا دَعَانِي فَلْيَسْتَجِيبُوا لِي وَلْيُؤْمِنُوا بِي لَعَلَّهُمْ يَرْشُدُونَ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in verse 186 of the Quran, or of Surah Al-Baqarah, the second chapter, وَإِذَا سَأَلَكَ عِبَادِي, that when my servant asks you, عَنِّي, about me. So who is this referring to? Who is the you? When they ask you, it is referring to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. When they ask you about me, about Allah. Now, the context of this revelation, the asbab, the sabab, or the asbab al-nuzul, as we call it in our tradition, the context of this revelation is equally interesting. And there's different riwayah, there's different traditions. One tradition says that the Prophet that because of where and what's interesting is you have to also bear an account and take into account the context of this verse. Where is this verse coming? This verse comes after Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala discusses the verses related to fasting. Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu kutiba alaykumus siyam is 183, and then it follows. And all the preceding verses before this one are speaking about fasting. And so one of the traditions is that this came at a time where some of the community members, some of the companions felt that they were not fulfilling the obligations of fasting. They were failing in their fast. Fasting was still relatively new. That is to say, the fast of Ramadan was still relatively new. And so the people who were fasting, the companions in the community, felt dejected. They felt that they weren't fulfilling this very important obligation. And so this verse comes in the context of that community feeling dejected, feeling low, because they weren't fulfilling the command of Allah. And so then Allah says, وَإِذَا سَأَلَكَ عِبَادِي عَنِّي, when, O Muhammad, when my servant asks of you, and then the ayah continues, asks of you of me, and then the verse continues. The other tradition, and this is perhaps more of a kind of direct connection if we follow, or if we take the opinion of the second riwayah of this verse, is that the Prophet ﷺ was responding to a question put forth by a Bedouin. A Bedouin comes to the Prophet ﷺ and he says, Ya Rasulullah, is Allah near so that when I call on him, I can speak in a low voice? Or is Allah far and distant? And so I have to raise my voice when I call upon Allah. And so then the Prophet fell silent, and then this verse was revealed. And so then the verse reveals itself. وَإِذَا سَأَلَكَ عِبَادِي عَنِّي فَإِنِّي قَرِيبٌ. Now this is a beautiful, again, there's so many beautiful lessons in this verse, and we're not going to have the time to discuss all of them, but a few. This verse is an example of one of the features of Arabic rhetoric, of balagha, known as iltifat, which is where the grammar changes between, say, the third person and the first person, or the first person and the third person. I mean, this happens oftentimes in the Qur'an, and there's a reason and there's a purpose for it. For example, in Surah Al-Fatiha that we recite every day, the surah begins, Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. It begins in the passive tense, and it speaks of Allah. But it speaks of Allah, it refers to Allah, Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, that all praise is due to Allah. Maliki Yawmiddin, Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim, Maliki Yawmiddin. And then it shifts. Iyyaka na'budu wa iyyaka nasta'in. We call upon you. Iyyaka na'budu, and we call upon you, or we worship you, and we follow you. Ihdina as-sirat al-mustaqim. And then we are asking Allah a dua, a supplication. So it changes from the third person to the first person, plural. Here, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala employs that same Arabic rhetorical device, where the verse begins by responding or by acknowledging a question. That when my servant asks of you, O Prophet of Allah, O Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, but here, rather than the verse saying faqul, say, as is often occurs in the Quran when the Prophet is asked something. Yas'alunaka, the Quran says. They ask you, O Prophet. Yas'alunaka anir ruh. Qul, say. Yas'alunaka qul. Yas'alunaka qul. That is oftentimes what we see in the Quran. They ask you about something, tell them this. But here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala omits that clause. There is no faqul. There is no say, O Prophet. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala himself responds to the question by saying, فَإِنِّي قَرِيبٌ. When they ask you, O Prophet, when my servant asks you about me, فَإِنِّي قَرِيبٌ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala directly responds. Again, showing that intimacy, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is always available to us to call upon him, to call upon him. فَإِنِّي قَرِيبٌ أُجِيبُ دَعْوَةَ دَاعِي إِذَا دَعَانِي. To respond to the caller, to the one petitioning, whenever he or she calls upon me. Whenever he or she calls upon me. And again, we don't have time to get into all of the various nuances of this verse. I wish I had time. But the verse refers to this kind of intimate relationship. Because even the words that are being used here, for example, when it speaks of the dua, it uses a construct in the Arabic language that denotes that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is always willing and always available to respond to the petitioning, to the petition, to the dua by the petitioner. إِذَا دَعَانِي فَلْيَسْتَجِيبُوا لِي. And now here there's a conditional sentence. So that let he or she then obey me. Respond to me. فَلْيَسْتَجِيبُوا لِي وَلْيُؤْمِنُوا بِي. And believe in me. لَعَلَّهُمْ يَرْشُدُونَ. So that he or she may be guided. And again, we don't have time to delve into all of the various beauties here explored in this verse. But again, the gist of it is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is responding to us directly and is creating an intimate relationship with the believer. And that the believer has an opportunity and should avail him or herself of this opportunity to call on Allah, to make dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala every chance and every opportunity that he or she has. Now, what's interesting is here, regardless of which narration that you take with regards to the context of the verse, so whether it was revealed to respond to the question of the Bedouin, or it was revealed because the Muslim community was feeling dejected or in a particular state because of their fasting, that Allah is responding to a theological question. But he's responding to that theological question of where is Allah? Or am I fulfilling my obligations to Allah? by setting forth or creating an intimate and direct relationship with him. These are practical steps. Allah is responding to this theological question in a practical manner, in a practical fashion. Call upon me. Make dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah is saying. And that is how you will feel, that is how you will remove your feelings of remorse and dejection. That is how you will be close to me, and I am close to you, Allah is saying, because I respond to the petition when the petitioner calls upon me, when the supplicant asks of me. And so in the very brief time that I have remaining, to set forth some practical guidelines with regards to our dua. Because as I said earlier, yes, the dua doesn't have any prerequisites, but yet there are certain preferred methods by which, according to our tradition, we can increase the possibility, if you will, of our dua being mustajab, of our dua being responded to. And some of these, we don't have time to get into all of them. First and foremost is that we must be confident, or we must be in a state of purity. And not just, I don't just mean ritual purity or wudu, but rather that our rizq is pure, our sustenance is pure, that which we eat, the wealth that we earn, how we earn it. Because one of the ways in which that a dua is not accepted is if a person's rizq or sustenance, that which he or she consumes, either materially, food, so are we mindful of what we eat, the quality of the food that we're eating, or are we just mindless consumers? And are we mindful of the wealth that we earn and how we spend that wealth and what we do with that wealth? Because those are also means by which we can pollute our wealth, how we earn it and how we consume it. And so to be cognizant of and to be mindful of our wealth and our state of purity. And that is one of the ways in which we can accept, or we can increase the possibilities of our dua being accepted. And finally, and again, I don't have time to go into all of this, but one of the things we also learn from tradition is to call upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for all of our needs, yes, and to not do it in a hasty fashion, but that also we can call upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through Allah's attributes. So if we're seeking Allah's forgiveness, we call upon those names of Allah that speak of His forgiving nature. Ya Ghafar, Ya Ghafur, Ya Rahman, Ya Tawwab, and so on. And so it's imperative then to what? Learn the names and attributes of Allah. MCC has a beautiful class on Thursday nights with Imam Zayd Shakir. I was telling someone else when I was encouraging people to attend, I said, this is a treasure in our backyard. Imam Zayd is sitting in an intimate gathering. This is a world-renowned scholar right here in our backyard. Every Thursday for the next, I think there's a schedule and you can check out the dates. Imperative class that speaks about Asma'ul Husna. Because when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks of his beautiful names and attributes, He says what? وَلِلَّهِ أَسْمَاءُ الْحُسْنَى فَأُدْعُهُ بِهَا. To Allah belongs the most beautiful names, so call Him by those names. And so we can ask Allah through the attributes that we seek. That's one of the means by which we can have our dua to be mustajab. Another thing that we find in tradition, brothers and sisters, and I'll conclude with this, is to ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala based upon our own good deeds. And we find this, for example, in the tradition of the Prophet, the hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, recorded in Sahih Muslim and Bukhari, and recorded in Imam Nawawi's Riyadh al-Salihin, about the three travelers, and then when they're trapped in the cave. It's a beautiful hadith, and I don't have time to go into all of it, but they're trapped in this cave and they call upon Allah to save them from being trapped in this cave by a good deed that they did. Now, what's interesting is that the good deeds that they call upon are not acts of direct worship. So none of the good deeds that these three travelers refer to speak of prayer or fasting, but rather, for example, one talks about warding off temptation, not giving in to temptation. Another one speaks of being fair in commercial transactions. Another one talks about the duty that he fulfilled to his parents, the love and devotion that he showed to his parents. These are not, again, direct acts of what we consider to be worship. So we can call upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, regardless of what our bank account holds, and by bank account here I mean the account of our good deeds, that we have done something good in our lives. And whatever good we have done in our lives, we can call upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala by virtue of those good deeds. Allah doesn't need a reminder, but it's like a resume, right? When you're petitioning for a job, that's what you do with a resume. What do? You put your best skills forward, right? You don't highlight your deficiencies. You highlight your skills and your assets and your talents and your accomplishments, because you hope that that gets the attention of the employer. So when you're a petitioner, you want to highlight what you've done that's good and virtuous, your skills and your assets and your experiences. And that's what you're doing here as a petitioner, beseeching not an employer, but beseeching the Lord and the majesty of the universe, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Can we do any less? And so to call upon Allah with his beautiful names and attributes, to call upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through his good deeds. And there's other means, and we don't have the time to get into it, but again, this beautiful opportunity that we have, brothers and sisters, to forge a direct and intimate bond with our Creator by turning to him and asking him when we need something, regardless of how small or how insufficient or insignificant, that we think that what we're asking him is. We ask Allah. We ask Allah. And that is a form and an expression of our ubudiyyah to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, of our devotion and our love and our adoration and our worship of him. أقول قولي هذا واستغفر الله لي ولكم وآخر دعوانا الحمد لله رب العالمين. إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. أما بعد، يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله حق تقاته ولا تموتن إلا وأنتم مسلمون. يا أيها الناس اتقوا ربكم الذي خلقكم من نفس واحدة وخلق منها زوجها وبث منهما رجالا كثيرا ونساء واتقوا الله الذي تساءلون به والأرحام إن الله كان عليكم رقيبا. يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله وقولوا قولا سديدا يصلح لكم أعمالكم ويغفر لكم ذنوبكم ومن يطع الله ورسوله فقد فاز فوزا عظيما. اللهم صل على سيدنا حبيبنا مولانا محمد وبارك وسلم. ربنا لا تؤاخذنا إن نسينا أو أخطأنا. ربنا ولا تحمل علينا إصرا كما حملته على الذين من قبلنا. ربنا ولا تحملنا ما لا طاقة لنا به واعف عنا واغفر لنا وارحمنا أنت مولانا فانصرنا على القوم الكافرين. يا مقلب القلوب ثبت قلوبنا على دينك. سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين وأقيموا الصلاة.
الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر.